Gurkhas are probably some of the most highly skilled and motivated warriors the world has ever seen, with a rich history of lethality dating back to even before their British conscription during the Anglo-Nepalese War from 1814 to 1816. Equipped with the rugged mountain physiology common amongst the people of the Himalayas, and a deep technical knowledge of combat with the legendary kukri blade that, as tradition dictates, must taste blood if it is ever drawn, and a firm conviction that it is better to die in battle than live as a coward. Their reputation has enshrined them amongst the fiercest combat units in history, and in today's video we will explore the origins of these elite warriors, their centuries of service under the British Crown, and the legacy of exceptional military service that they have carried on to this very day. During the English invasion of India, the British troops swept through the land rather easily, until they reached the Nepalese kingdom. The British, riding high on their egos of fairly easy conquests, thought that Nepal would be another pushover, but they would soon come to realize that the young men from Gorkha regarded war as a sport. The Gurkhas quickly swooped into the valley to occupy 700 miles of frontier to face off against the advancing British. During the Battle of Kalunga, the Gurkhas were heavily outgunned but not outmatched. The Gurkhas, in their till we die attitude, would go on to fight until almost the very last man, losing a total of 520 warriors, but not before killing almost 800 British troops. Although both sides would endure devastating losses, they came to a mutual adoration of one another. After the battle, the British built monuments that praised the Gurkhas' courage, sacrifice, and lack of fear in the face of sheer and imminent death. The Gurkhas' leader would go on to share similar remarks about the British, saying that the British fought like lions. This mutual respect of one another would go on to form an alliance between the two parties, and the Gurkhas agreed to a contract to fight with the British for the next 180 years. The British command on the ground found extreme confidence in their loyalty, so much so that in April 1815, Major General Otterlarky formed them into the battalion under Lieutenant Ross called the Nazarene Regiment. This regiment would go on to see action at Milan under the leadership of Lieutenant Lottie. Conscription into the British Indian Army for Gurkha regiments was so sought after that by the end of 1815 there were about 5,000 men who volunteered, and they soon became known as the backbone of the British Indian Army. This British-led specialized unit would be responsible for some of the most heroic acts of courage and bravery man has ever known. Gurkhas served as troops under contract to the British East India Company in the Pindari War of 1817 and Bharatpur in 1826, and the First and Second Anglo-Sikh Wars of 1846 and 1848. The Gurkhas worked hard, fought hard, and their loyalty and skill were never in question. Even at the start of the Indian Rebellion in 1857, the Gurkhas fought alongside the British. Specifically, the 5th Battalion, 8th Gurkha Rifles made notable contributions during the conflict. 3 days after the rebellion began, the 5th Battalion, 8th Gurkhas was ordered to move to Meerut, where the 38th, 54th, and 37th Regiments of the Bengal Native Infantry were suffering heavy casualties and were barely holding on. Due to the sense of urgency to rescue their comrades, the Gurkhas marched up to 30 miles in a day. Later, during the 4-month siege of Delhi, they defended Hindu Rao's house, losing 327 men out of a total of 490. During this action, they fought side by side with the British 60th Rifles, and by the end of the siege, 25 Indian Order of Merit awards were given to the men of the 5th Battalion. Between 1858 and 1901, the Gurkhas would continue to see fierce fighting in many foreign lands such as Burma, Afghanistan, Northeast India, Russia, Turkey, Cyprus, Malaya, and China. After almost a century of combat experience and military progression, by 1906, the Gurkhas were organized into 10 whole regiments numbering over 200,000 men. These 200,000 men, and many more, would go on to see intense fighting all across the fronts of World War I. A large number in particular saw combat in France, Belgium, Turkey, Palestine, Iraq, Persia, Gallipoli, and Sri Lanka. Notably, during the unsuccessful Gallipoli campaign in 1915, the Gurkhas were among the first to arrive and the last to leave, and they proved to be the most successful and praised units of the campaign. In early 1915, Allied forces still maintained the idea of breaking through the Turkish lines at Gallipoli. On the night of May 10th, the 1st Battalion, 6 Gurkhas, had landed at Cape Helens and led the assault during the first major operation to take the Turkish high point. Despite heavy resistance to previous landings and assaults, multiple double companies of the 1st Battalion, 6 Gurkha Rifles crept along the shore at Y Beach and assembled below in a 300-foot bluff. With the Turks distracted by the bombardment, the Gurkhas then swiftly scaled the cliffs and crawled towards the enemy trenches. The Turks noticed the creeping Gurkhas and, in an effort to hold their ground, opened up with machine guns and grenades. And in the face of certain death, the Gurkhas got up and began to rush the trench system. Utilizing their infamous kukri blade, they engaged in brutal hand-to-hand fighting with the Turks. and after many hours of fierce fighting, the Gurkhas overwhelmed the position and effectively secured the trench system. This had allowed the previously stalled Allied left flank to advance nearly 500 yards up the rocky bluffs. This success, at the cost of comparatively light losses, was due to the Gurkhas' bravery in the face of heavy fire against a well-dug-in and formidable enemy. They were the only troops in the whole campaign to reach and hold the crest line and look down the straits, which is the ultimate objective for every unit involved at Gallipoli. By the end of the war, 6,000 Gurkha troops were killed in action, while another 20,000 were severely injured. 3 men would go on to receive the Victoria Cross, which were among the first ever awarded to troops not of English descent. After the war, they pivoted from fierce shock troops to peacekeepers in India for several years, maintaining a warlord-like presence over the northwest frontier, while also participating in the Third Anglo-Afghan War of 1919. As the course of World War II came to fruition, the Gurkhas were again largely employed into service alongside the British, raising a total of 43 battalions comprised of 250,000 men. They would go on to fight mainly in North Africa, Italy, and Burma, enduring heavy casualties due to the Gurkhas often spearheading attacks or holding out in defensive positions while under heavy siege. Many men who fought in these battalions made extremely notable contributions across all fronts and would go on to receive Britain's highest honor, the Victoria Cross. Corporal Again Singh Rai, for example, earned his Victoria Cross for leading his section to recapture 2 enemy objectives in the Chin Hills of Burma in June of 1944. After a preliminary artillery bombardment on the 2 positions named Mortar Bluff and Water Piquet, the 2nd Battalion 5th Gurkhas Charlie Company attempted to attack the enemy positions, but were pinned down at the false crest by heavy enemy machine gun fire at Mortar Bluff, along with 37mm artillery fire from the nearby jungle. While under fire, Rai, perceiving that any delay would just result in more casualties, courageously charged 80 yards towards Mortar Bluff, firing his Thompson submachine gun as he went through the open field. He himself managed to kill 3 of the 4 troops at the machine gun position, and his men, inspired by this, followed him and managed to scatter the whole enemy garrison at Mortar Bluff. Mortar Bluff then came under fire by the nearby 37mm artillery piece and machine gun fire from Water Piquet. So Rai, without hesitation, led his section into a charge on the artillery piece. During the assault, Rai lost 3 of his men before reaching the objective. He and his men closed with the enemy gun crew. Rai himself killed 3 of the enemy, while Rai's men killed the other 2. The section then returned to Mortar Bluff, and along with the rest of their platoon, prepared for the final assault on Water Piquet. During the advance on Water Piquet, an isolated bunker position held by the Japanese caused further serious casualties, utilizing grenades and heavy machine gun fire. So Rai, for a 3rd time, advanced alone onto the enemy position, covered by his Bren gunner, with a grenade and his Thompson in hand, charged through the hail of enemy gunfire. He then reached the bunker and managed to kill all 4 occupants. This display of calm vigor and courage further demoralized the enemy at Water Piquet, and so in a final rush, Rai's platoon captured the objective. Another prime example is Rifleman Banabagat Gurung, who earned his Victoria Cross on the Arkhan coast of Burma in March 1945. On March 5th, the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Gurkha Rifles, Bravo Company, attacked an enemy position known as Snowdon East. On approaching the objective, Gurung's section was forced to the ground by very heavy machine gun, grenade, and mortar fire. While pinned down, the section came under accurate fire from the Japanese sniper in a tree 75 yards south of their position. As the sniper was inflicting devastating casualties onto the section amidst the chaos, Rifleman Gurung, being unable to fire from the lying position, stood up and fully exposed himself to the heavy grenade, mortar, and machine gun fire, and calmly killed the sniper with his rifle, thus saving his section from suffering any further casualties. The section then advanced, but when they got 20 yards of the objective, they were again pinned down by heavy rifle and machine gun fire from the entrenched Japanese. Gurung, without waiting for any orders, dashed forward alone and attacked the first enemy foxhole. Throwing 2 grenades, he killed the 2 occupants, and without any hesitation rushed onto the next enemy foxhole, and killed another Japanese soldier in it with his bayonet. 2 further enemy foxholes were still bearing fire on his section, and again Gurung dashed forward alone and cleared these with his bayonet and a grenade. During his single-handed attacks on these 4 enemy foxholes, Gurung was subject to almost continuous and point-blank machine gun fire from a bunker to the north of the objective. Realizing that this machine gun would hold up not only his own platoon, which was now behind him, but also another platoon which was advancing from the west, Gurung, for a 5th time, went forward alone in the face of heavy enemy fire to knock out this position. He bounded forward and leapt onto the roof of the bunker and flung in 2 smoke grenades into the bunker slit. 2 Japanese soldiers, partially blinded by the smoke, attempted to escape out of the bunker. Gurung promptly killed them both with his kukri. A remaining Japanese inside the bunker was still firing the machine gun and stalling the Gurkhas' advance, so Gurung crawled inside the bunker, killed this Japanese gunner, and captured the machine gun. At this point, most of the objective had been cleared and Gurung's platoon had caught up with him. Gurung then ordered the nearest Bren gunner and 2 riflemen to take up the position in the captured bunker. The enemy counterattack followed soon after, but under Rifleman Gurung's command, the small party inside the bunker repelled the counterattack and led to devastating casualties for the Japanese. Gurung showed outstanding bravery and complete disregard for his own safety. His courageous clearing of 5 enemy positions single-handedly was in itself decisive in capturing the objective and inspired the rest of Bravo Company to capture and hold their objective. These men's stories of bravery are just some of the few acts of heroic determination not uncommon amongst the Gurkhas. As is always the case with wartime feats, for every story we know, there are likely to be hundreds that we will just never hear of. But it is clear that over the course of the war, Gurkhas have proved yet again that they stand amongst the elite. Just like how the rest of history is subject to change, so were the Gurkhas. Not in lethality or military capabilities, just more so in association. As Nepal had already gained its independence from England, when India and Pakistan gained their own sovereignty, it opened up the question of what exactly is to be done with the remaining Gurkha battalions at the end of the war. Of the 10 remaining Gurkha regiments, India took command of 6, while Britain retained command of 4, as established by the Britain-Nepal-India Tripartite Agreement of 1947. Occasionally, Gurkha soldiers had the option to choose where to serve. Many chose to remain in South Asia under Indian command, and as such, India's Gurkha regiments have grown over the years, while Britain's has decreased. Those who did remain under British command have served in the modern-day Gurkha Brigade and have seen continued service alongside British troops in Malaysia, Brunei, the Falklands, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Unsurprisingly, those conflicts have also been filled with stories of heroism by individual Gurkhas. During the Brunei Revolt in November of 1965, Lance Corporal Rambada Limbu earned his Victoria Cross. While serving with the 2nd Battalion, 10th Gurkha Regiment, Limbu's company had received orders to dominate a position about 5,000 yards within Indonesian territory. Limbu, spearheading the advance, reached the nearest enemy trench, killing the Indonesian sentry but not before coming under fire and losing a man on his fire team. Amidst the commotion, the surrounding enemy positions became alerted to the Gurkhas' presence and began directing heavy and accurate machine gun fire onto the trench. Limbu, realizing that his fire team's position was now compromised, left the cover of his trench to reposition himself and his fire team to a better position a few yards ahead. The deafening noise of the gunfire and explosives made communication between Limbu and his platoon commander impossible. So despite the heavy fire, Limbu left his position to find his commander to report their new position. It was at this point that the 2 remaining men of Limbu's fire team became seriously wounded. Limbu immediately left to return to the position to rescue his men, low crawling for 3 minutes under heavy and continuous machine gun fire. The sheer weight of the enemy fire stopped his advance, and he realized that only a quick rush would allow him the chance to cover the remaining few yards between him and his men. He rapidly rushed forward and managed to reach the first wounded man and carried him back to safety. Without hesitation, Limbu again moved out in a series of short bursts, utilizing what little cover was available to him. Eventually, after almost 20 minutes, he reached the second man and carried him back behind the lines. Limbu then returned to his platoon to continue the attack. Now equipped with a stolen machine gun, he gave support during the assault, personally killing 4 more enemy soldiers as they attempted to escape. In more recent events, in the Helmand province of Afghanistan in September of 2010, Sergeant Diprasad Poon had earned the conspicuous Gallantry Cross. On the night of the 17th, while Poon's platoon were out on patrol, he stayed back to guard the patrol base along with a fire team-sized element. While on the roof of the patrol base, Poon heard some noises and he thought it was an animal, and looked over to see 2 Taliban fighters placing an IED along the side of the road. He yelled out to the men to identify themselves, but was instead greeted with small arms and rocket fire from 15 Taliban insurgents. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Poon quickly informed his commander over the radio of the situation at hand, then proceeded to launch a 40mm grenade at the enemy. Utilizing the machine gun on his post, Poon opened fire on the advancing fighters. Within minutes, he ran out of ammunition for his machine gun and resorted to using grenades to break up the enemy's advance before grabbing his rifle. While moving from position to position, he continued to engage the enemy with his rifle in an attempt to halt the Taliban's advance. Some of the enemy, however, managed to sneak past Poon and climbed into the compound and up onto the roof where Poon was located. Poon quickly shot and killed the first insurgent before his rifle jammed, causing him to ditch his rifle and pick up the tripod for the machine gun. Utilizing the tripod, he threw it at the second insurgent, hitting him in the head and knocking him unconscious. Moments later, Poon looked over the side of the building, and to his surprise, there were more Taliban climbing up the side. Out of ammo and almost out of options, Poon threw a sandbag at the insurgents, knocking one of them off the wall before setting off a claymore that finally caused the Taliban to withdraw before Poon's patrol base could be reinforced by more British troops. In addition to their work alongside British forces, the Gurkhas have served alongside Indian troops in other conflicts such as the Sino-Indian War, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Specifically, during the Sino-Indian War, Major Dang Singh Thapa earned India's highest military honor, the Param Vir Shakar. On the 20th of October in 1962, Forward Post Surjap 1 in Ladakh, manned by the 1st Battalion 8th Gurkha Rifles, was attacked by an overwhelming Chinese assault following an intensive artillery bombardment. Under Thapa's command, the greatly outnumbered post repulsed the attack, inflicting heavy casualties on the Chinese. Shortly after the first failed attack, the enemy made another attempt, this time in greater numbers, after another heavy shelling of the post by more artillery and mortar fire. Thapa and his men again repulsed this attack as well, inflicting even more casualties on the enemy. For a third time, the Chinese attacked, this time with tanks to support the infantry. As the post had already suffered a large number of casualties in the earlier two attacks, the considerably reduced Indian force held out to the very last man. Seeing the post was overrun, Major Thapa got out of his trench and proceeded to kill several Chinese soldiers in hand-to-hand combat before he was finally overpowered and captured. He would later be released in a prisoner exchange after the war, but not before enduring severe torture at the hands of the Chinese. In Sri Lanka, the Gurkhas under Indian command sustained heavy casualties during peacekeeping operations to suppress the Tigers of Tamil, a militant terrorist organization that employed the use of coordinated large-scale attacks and suicide commandos known as the Black Tigers to attack not only the Sri Lankan government, but also innocent citizens. Despite the Gurkhas' continued loyalty, bravery, and military prowess, the Gurkhas' quality by which they are treated by their host governments is criminal. Currently in Singapore, some 2,000 Gurkha troops work as police and military reservists, yet receive far less pay than Singaporeans do for doing similar work. Upon retirement, Gurkhas receive minimal medical resources and benefits with basically no support if they choose not to remain in Singapore, where the cost of living is often untenably high. Pension and benefits for cases of medical discharge in the line of duty are also unheard of. In India, there are currently 35,000 active Gurkhas that may be in danger, as there are many changes on the horizon in the Indian Army due to financial instability. As it stands, Nepal has refused to send any more troops into the Indian Army over concerns that the Gurkhas and other Indian soldiers will no longer receive long tenure, pensions, or medical care under the new Agnipath plan. In the UK, there are currently 3,500 Gurkhas under the British command, and the situation is definitely better, but not great. In 2009, Gurkhas were guaranteed the right to live in the UK after retirement and receive a pension after at least 15 years of service. However, Gurkhas who completed their service prior to July of 1997 are ineligible for these benefits, and are instead taken care of by whatever donations members of the Gurkha community can produce by themselves. You know, as if the Gurkhas weren't stacking bodies in the name of the empire before 1997. Obviously, this is unacceptable for the men who put their lives on the line before 1997, but what do you really expect from the English government? While we certainly hope that a change arises in the near future, it is unlikely that the problem will ever be fixed or even addressed by the UK. With that being said, the UK's current Gurkha program still represents a path out of poverty for young Nepalese men and their families who have a reasonable chance at selection. Yet the coveted spots in the British Army's Brigade of Gurkhas are much harder to come by. Every year, roughly 10,000 18 to 20-year-old Nepalese men try their very best to earn one out of just 200 available spots. To earn one of these scarce spots, they must pass a basic medical, language, and math exam in the first phase, perform a physical test consisting of a minimum of 12 overarm heaves, an 800-meter run in under 2 minutes and 30 seconds, a repeated lift and carry under 1 minute and 46 seconds in the second phase, and in the third and final phase, candidates must complete a drug test, an English speaking and comprehension test, and a final interview, along with another physical fitness test consisting of a 2-kilometer run under 8 minutes and 15 seconds, a jerry can carry under 2 minutes, and a Doko run under 46 minutes, which is an uphill 4.2-kilometer race in which each young man carries 25 kilograms of weight on their backs. Those who fail can still undergo selection with India, Brunei, or Singapore, but if they fail, they are forced to remain in Nepal under economic difficulty. In the future, the world's battlefields is likely to change rapidly, especially with the new weapon systems and advancing military tech beginning to permanently change the nature of warfare as we know it. And the Gurkhas in an especially precarious position, as their status essentially as mercenaries is likely to put them on deck for budget cuts and possible disbandment. But as it stands, for as long as the Gurkha contracts exist in Britain, India, and Singapore, and anywhere else around the world, it is fair to assume that the Gurkhas will continue to answer the call, and when they do, it will be with the same vigor, the same courage, and the same lethal expertise that has positioned them amongst the elite. Till next time, and as always, thank you for watching.